you want to retain it. You don't just want to learn for a test. That's what school today is now. People go 4 years of college. I'm reading a book right now that is making a very strong case, and the Department of Education knows this, that about 40% of students learn nothing in 4 years of college. 40%, nothing. It's pretty amazing. And this is Department of Education studies. So what a waste of money and time. And the reason they learn nothing is because it's all about just working for the grade, and then when the grade's over, they just forget everything. So the Islamic tradition, you have to retain knowledge. And retention means review, what's called mudhakara. We want to create a community of learners so that you're actually discussing the books you're reading with each other. You can discuss them with the teachers. Part of the reason for reading the same books is that the older students that have already been through it, you can discuss with them also. But it's very important to create a culture of dialogue.
لم يخلق الرحمن مثل محمد بين الورى بشرا على الإطلاق لم يخلق الرحمن مثل محمد بين الورى بين الورى بشرا على الإطلاق كلا ولا عرف الخلائق قدره ما فوقه حقا سوى الخلاق كلا ولا عرف الخلائق قدره كلا ولا عرف الخلائق قدره ما فوقه حقا سوى الخلاق.
Assalamu alaikum everyone. We are back. And you are listening to episode 83 of the Muhammad Ghailan podcast with yours truly as the host. It has been a 4-month hiatus, close to 4 months. The last episode was released towards the end of 2019, November 2019. And we are now coming up to the middle of February 2020. Those of you who are long-term listeners of the podcast and followers of the work that I put out are probably aware. The end of 2019 was quite a busy year for me. It was marking the end of my third year as a medical student. I'm now in my fourth and final year. Alhamdulillah. Time just flies. And the School of Medicine here decided that given that some students are failing the clinical exams that are held at the end of your fourth year of medical school, which basically are to transition you from, examine your transition really, whether you can transition from being a medical student into an intern, full-time doctor working, you do these clinical exams. Now, a number of students were failing those exams at the end of fourth year. And when you fail them, you can't graduate, you can't start your internship, and that could delay your progression in your career and create basically an issue with timings. So what the School of Medicine decided to do was move these exams to the end of third year and have the students go through them. And if any students fail it, they get another opportunity in their fourth year while they're still students to go through these exams again and pass them. And that way it doesn't delay their graduation. So I had to prepare for those exams on top of having to prepare for the end of rotation exams that we had as well. So it was quite a busy time. Alhamdulillah, I got through all of that stuff. And I had a lot of fun. I have to say, the clinical exams, highlight of my time as a medical student, clinical exams. I always have the most fun doing them. I like interacting with patients. I like doing the actual hands-on work. And I like just having that conversation with the clinicians. So, just for those of you who are interested in medicine and applying to medical school, and maybe some inspiration you might derive from this, and just to see how it works, the clinical exams, the way that they work is you have these stations. And these stations are rooms, and outside the room at the door, there's a scenario that is printed and pasted on. You have 2 minutes to read the scenario, and at the end of the scenario, you have a task. And the task could be, it could be an examination of a particular system for the patient. It could be interpretation of the results that you will get when you enter into the room and explaining them to the patient. It could be constructing a management plan. It could be talking the patient out of doing one particular procedure and opting for another more conservative procedure. Whatever it is, it's a number of things it could be. One of the stations, in fact, was it read outside that the patient has passed out. Is no well known to your clinic, and you're in a rural clinic, and now you have to basically conduct CPR. And as soon as you enter, you see this dummy that's laying down, and you have to go through the whole basic life support thing. It was really cool. Anyways, the whole thing was really fun. By the end of it, I was a bit depressed. I just wanted to keep going. So alhamdulillah, got through all of that, had a lot of fun with it, got through all the exams. And on top of all of that, I was also preparing to launch this massive project that I've been talking about. FYI, AndalusOnline.org no longer exists. We now have Al-Andalus Academy. And Al-Andalus Academy is this behemoth of a project that I basically set on getting organized and launching. And I'll talk about it throughout this podcast because the whole episode is about Islamic education. And this project is my small contribution to trying to basically revamp and revolutionize how we think about education and learning, and applying that in some tangible way. So I had that going. And alhamdulillah, now I'm a family man, so family obligations also. So it's a lot of things you have to balance, and you have to basically, everybody has a right upon you, and you have to fulfill those rights and make sure that you're not, as to the best of your abilities, not shortchanging anyone. You're not neglecting anyone in the process. So a bit of restructuring in my life habits had to go through, between obligations to family, obligations to school and my medical education, obligations to the students that are part now of Al-Andalus Academy and fulfilling that. And so just having to juggle all of these things. Unfortunately, the podcast just had to take a back seat for a minute until I got all that organized. So inshallah, we'll be a little bit more regular with this as we move forward. Now, the whole thing started in this podcast with this clip of Sheikh Hamza Yusuf talking about a problem with just general modern education, and how students are not retaining anything, and the need for lifelong learners, and what does it mean to be a true student from an Islamic perspective, from an Islamic point of view. I want to tell you a story that I think I've mentioned it in a couple of interviews that I've had before. If you've listened to them, I apologize for the repetition, but if you haven't, it's something that to draw a lesson from, I guess. Towards the end of my undergraduate degree, Bachelor of Science, I was majoring in microbiology and minor in business administration at the University of Victoria. And I did an honors thesis towards the end of my degree. Alhamdulillah, I was blessed with the opportunity to do it in this neuroscience lab. And I loved the research. I thought it was really interesting. And that's when I applied for my graduate degree. That's when I applied for the master's program at the time in neuroscience. And I got the conditional acceptance. And so at the time I was conflicted. I wanted to go and study further Islamic studies. At the time I was already connected with some teachers, and I was doing some fiqh, I was doing some aqidah. But I wanted to do it more full-time. I wanted to just dedicate my life to this. And the idea that I had in mind at the time was, look, I want to go and travel and study in Mauritania. I want to go full-time. At the time, I remember my dad was freaking out because it's like, you have this opportunity, you could do this degree, you could continue your education, and then you're just going to give all that up. I mean, it's a story all too common. I'm sure some of you have gone through the same experience. So there was this concern, and so he had me, why don't you ask so-and-so, why don't you ask so-and-so, and have some conversations. Well, the person that I trusted, and I wanted to get his advice, was Imam Zaid Shakir. So I took a trip specially to the Revival of the Islamic Spirit conference, and I got into the knowledge retreat. And I went and asked him. I said, Imam, I have this opportunity. I got accepted into this neuroscience program. My intention was, the way that it worked was you get into the master's program and then you do the exam, the candidacy exam, and then you can transition into a PhD without having to finish your master's if you could. And I got into this program. But I also am passionate about Islamic studies. I really want to further my Islamic studies. I want to continue in that path. What do you think? And Imam Zayd told me at the time that he remembers a lot of brothers and sisters who had doors that were open to them. Allah opens different doors to different people. So they had doors open to them where they were. And instead of exhausting their local resources while going through the doors that have been opened to them, they closed all of those doors and then they went to Syria. And he saw them in Syria. They would come in because that door was not open to them. They actually had a struggle even getting settled and getting organized. And they didn't have the funds necessarily to really sustain themselves. So they had to get jobs while they were there in the daytime so that they can get the sustenance to maintain their residence and their food and whatnot. And then they would study at night, but they were so tired by the end of the day that their study, they weren't actually retaining that much information. And they would spend, 4, 5, 6 years. Then they would go back to wherever they go back to, whether it's America or Canada or the UK. And when they go back, they're not really that much further ahead than people who stayed put, connected with local teachers, and continued whatever it is that they had the door open for. So he told me, he said, look, Allah opened this door for you to do this graduate degree in neuroscience. We as a Muslim community, this idea of fard ayn and fard kifaya, we don't really have a solid grasp on it. He said, fard kifaya, we don't actually have anyone right now that is prominent with a graduate degree in something like neuroscience, who also has his foot grounded in the tradition, who's connected to teachers, who studies actively the classical tradition, and who can combine these two worlds. And what Imam Zayd was telling me there was something that was recently published in a paper, in an essay for Renovatio, Zaytuna College's journal, talking about the polymath versus the monopath. The polymath is basically not just Muslims, but every traditional scholar prior to this modern schism that was created in our minds, where you separate between the secular and the profane, and the modern education system born out of the Industrial Revolution that looks to subspecialize everyone and pigeonhole you into one specific specialty. The way people of the past studied was you studied different things. You combined between different areas of study, and you let that inform each area that you involve yourself in. Actually has a way of informing other areas, because the whole world is connected. Everything is synthesized in a particular way, and the more you have your breadth kind of widened, you might actually gain more depth in a particular area. So Imam Zayd was telling me, and I complained to him afterwards. I had this pushback. Later on, a couple of years later, I went to another program and I asked him, I said, I'm getting this pushback. People will tell me, it's like, you got to do one thing. You can't just do neuroscience and Islamic studies. You got to focus. You got to do this one thing, and you can't do the both of them. And Imam Zayd said, you're not trying to do a lot of things. You're just trying to do two things. You're just doing neuroscience and you're studying Islamic studies. And even within Islamic studies, it's not like I'm trying to become a mujtahid mutlaq in a particular, in like fiqh or something, start a new madhab. I have a particular interest in Islamic studies, which is to do with metaphysics and cosmology and theology, generally speaking. That's my interest. My interest is not to become a faqih muqaddam of like starting a new madhab, al-madhab al-Ghailani or something like that. It's just like, alhamdulillah, I follow the school of Imam Malik. I've studied that to some advanced degree, and I'm happy with that. I'm not interested in law per se. My interests are different. So I'm focused on one area anyways. So he said, pay no mind to those people. And what he was telling me there is, look, don't talk. The advice is basically don't talk to people that are small-minded, because they won't see it. You'll sound like you're totally unreasonable. What you're trying to do, if people can't think outside the box, when you come up with something that is paradigm shifting, they can't even process that. And so what they'll do is, it's intimidating to a lot of people. And I know this might come across a little bit arrogant, but that's not the intention here. It's intimidating. It's like, you're trying to do all of these things, and how are you going to find the time? And it is impossible for you to do, because the way that we've been educated through our modern education system is that you have to be focused and targeted to one thing, and that's all you do. And that's how you basically revolve your life around it. And you can't do anything else. But anyone that has done anything of significance to the world, not just to the field, where they actually have a strong impact on the world, they were more eclectic. They combine between different things. And when it comes to education, the purpose of education is not to become an expert in one area so that you can become a cog in the wheel. The purpose of education from an Islamic standpoint is to cultivate the thing that is called the human being, so that you become a human being as a verb. You be a human being, that you are cultivating the moral aspect of your being. The purpose of education is that ultimately to know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's from an Islamic standpoint, that you realize your position as a Khalifa. وَإِذْ قَالَ رَبُّكَ لِلْمَلَائِكَةِ إِنِّي جَاعِلٌ فِي الْأَرْضِ خَلِيفَةً. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in Surah Al-Baqarah tells us that He declared to the angels that He's going to put on earth a vicegerent. And after the questioning that the angels had regarding this vicegerent, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says something about Adam alayhi salam. وَعَلَّمَ آدَمَ الْأَسْمَاءَ كُلَّهَا ثُمَّ عَرَضَهُمْ عَلَى الْمَلَائِكَةِ. He taught Adam the names. So the Khilafah, this vicegerency, is intimately connected with knowledge, with education. And so knowing things about the world, knowing your place in the world, knowing that you're studying the creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that's what makes you a person of knowledge. And education is not something that is... This is something that Imam Zayd told me when I first asked him about advice, like, should I drop this graduate degree and go to Mauritania or stay? And he said something to me that to this day is still profound, and I tell it to every student. He said that this neuroscience degree is a limited degree, and in the modern world that we live in order for you to gain that credibility, you need to go through this program. And at the end of it, you'll be recognized as a neuroscientist of sorts. So you do this degree, however long it takes you, and then you're a neuroscientist. Then you have that accolade on top of it. But he said to me that Islamic education is not a degree program. And this is something that I've heard from a number of teachers. In fact, there's a famous story of Sheikh Muhammad Amin al-Shinqiti rahimahullah. He was asked about, and this is the Mauritanian scholar that wrote Tafsir al-Quran bil-Quran. He was asked by a student when he was teaching in Saudi, what is Shahadatul Zur? What is the bearing of false witness? What is perjury, in other words, in court? And he said, Shahadatul Zur is this piece of paper that we give you at the end of this degree program that says you know something. In other words, this thing that you claim that you're a scholar now, you've studied Islamic studies, you get this piece of paper, Sharia, whatever it is that you have, and then you can basically tout that around and say like, I've studied Islamic studies, and then people can call you sheikh and scholar. He said, that's Shahada, that's perjury. That's our perjury. This is our bearing false witness. Because in Arabic, Shahada is degree. So that's what he was referring to. So Imam Zayd said, this is Islamic knowledge is something that you will continue to do until you die. It never ends. You'll always continue doing this. Don't think of Islamic studies as a limited degree program or an endeavor that you delve into for a couple of years and then you have that. In fact, I've heard in one of the graduation ceremonies for Al-Azhar University, one of the mashayikh said that by the end, now that you have these degrees, don't consider yourself a scholar. You merely have the keys to become a scholar. You now know how to navigate through the tradition, and now it's on you to become a scholar. But we're not declaring you an actual alim, a scholar in that sense. So I find that interesting. I found that very interesting. I still do find that interesting. The idea that education for us is a continual thing. And I noticed something in the medical education model. In medical education, once you finish your degree, that's not the end of it. The way that medical education works is actually a lot like how the Islamic tradition, when it comes to knowledge, should work in my estimation, and how it worked in the past and how it should work in the modern times. You go through this program. First of all, you go through these foundational years where you're not even considered in medical school yet. The new way to study medicine is you first have to go and get a degree. They don't care what degree it's in. At least I'm talking about the North American and now increasingly the Australian model that they're doing medical degrees. graduate entry programs. The graduate entry program requires you to have a bachelor's degree. And the bachelor's degree, they don't care what it's in. It could be in any field. It could be in fine arts for all they care. What they care about is that you have prerequisite courses within this degree that you would have taken for the medical program. And these courses are biology. There's a number of credits that you would have had to have in biology, a number of credits that you need in chemistry, inorganic chemistry, and inorganic and organic chemistry, in biochemistry, a number of credits in physics. So they have these number of courses that you have to do within your degree. The overall degree, it could be in political science, it could be in engineering, it could be in anything that you want. As long as you do these courses, you're okay. And then you do this exam. In Australia, they call it the GAMSAT. In North America, it's the MCAT, the Medical College Admission Test. This test, it's close to a 6.5, 7 hour long exam that you basically, it's a full day thing, divided into sections. And you do this exam that basically tests your knowledge and your reasoning in a number of areas relevant to what they think would make a successful physician, at least a successful student of medicine. So you go through this exam, you score, and then they have minimum scores for them to even consider you, and then it's a competitive process in the application. And then once you apply, and let's say that you get in, now you begin to call yourself a medical student. Before that, you're pre-med. Then you go into medical school. Medical school is another 4 years. So bachelor's degree between 3 to 4 years. Medical school is about 4 years. Some schools do it in 3 years, depending on how many breaks they take. And then after medical school, then you have, it depends on the system. If it's in North America, you enter into a residency training program, and that depends on the specialty that you take. It could be between as little as 2 years up to 7 years if you're in a surgical kind of thing. In Australia here, and I think the Australian system is actually superior because it gives you more breadth and more exposure. The way they do it is after you finish your medical school, then you have a year of internship where you have a provisional medical license. Provisional means that you're not a fully licensed physician yet. Provisional license, you're under supervision. So you work as an intern and you do a number of rotations. You basically repeat some of the rotations that you've done as a medical student, but now you have it with more responsibility. And you do that for 1 year. After this year, you become a registrar. And then you can work, you redo some more rotations, but your responsibilities increase as you progress and as the years pass by. So as PGY2, so postgraduate year 2, you're a registrar, and then you can apply basically, and you take the exam for either the physician training pathway, or you can do it for the surgical training pathway. So you'd know if you want. And if you don't know yet, you can just continue to do rotations until you know what you want to do. So let's say you enter into the physician training pathway, and then you can do more rotations. And if you want to get into a particular program, let's say you want to get into family medicine. Family medicine requires you to have a number of hours done. It could be either a rotation or a number of hours done in pediatrics. You need to have done obstetrics as well. And I believe emergency as well. You need to have some hours done in emergency. And depending on the specific family medicine training pathway, if you're doing rural medicine, then they need anesthetics as well. And so different programs require different things. And as you are continuing to do these things, let's say that you finished the program, you entered into a training program. Now you're a consultant. After you're a consultant, you're required to complete continuing medical education credits, CME credits. And these CME credits are basically to make sure that you're not going to get rusty and just rely on your past knowledge. This field is continually developing. Research continues to be done. Algorithms change. Treatment protocols change. What we know about the body as we increase in knowledge can change. So you need to understand how to treat ailments, how to approach things, and all of these things. You have to be kept abreast with all of this stuff. Now think about this in terms of Islamic education. If we were to apply the same model, what you would do is you would finish your undergraduate degree in Islamic Sharia, and it's general. You would not specialize in anything. It will just be Islamic studies. It will be like a broad range of subjects that you're just getting exposed to. And then after that, you begin an internship as a Muslim, as a graduate Muslim student in Islamic studies. This internship basically exposes you just do more rotations. You just do more of the same that you were doing, but at a deeper level. where you start to develop your interest. You start to say like, oh, maybe I like hadith, or I like fiqh, or I like usul al-fiqh, or whatever it is that you're interested in. And then you basically delve, or Arabic language, tafsir, however, whatever your specialty is that you want to focus on, then you focus on that area. And as you go on, you continue, and you do. And let's say there's a training program for that. The training program is for, let's say, maqasid, the maqasidi tradition. And so you start to specialize in that, and you delve deeper into it, and however many years you take into that, and then you become a scholar in that area. That's if we were to think about Islamic studies as a separate thing. If we think about it in the modern sense, where we create this modern schism between the sacred and the profane, that there is something called secular. We don't have that in Islamic in an Islamic paradigm. قالوا يا شعيب أتأمرك صلاتك أن نترك ما يعبد آباؤنا وأن نفعل في أموالنا ما نشاء. They said, "Oh Shu'aib," this is in Surah Hud, I believe. They said, "Oh Shu'aib, does your prayer command you to prohibit us that we should leave what our forefathers were worshipping, or that we should not do أن نفعل في أموالنا ما نشاء, that we can't do with our money whatever we want?" The first people that have created the schism, that there is a thing called religion that you keep in the closet at home, and there is this idea that we can just act however we want outside, are Ashabu Layka, the people of Shu'aib. And this is the modern world that we're living in now, where it's a replication of the people of Shu'aib. SubhanAllah, every time you look at the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala chose specific people to mention to us, because we will do similar things as they were doing. And that's kind of what's going on in our world today. So Islamic studies never looked at things, the Muslim scholars never did things as just one. If you look at the biographies of our Muslim scholars, they were eclectic. They were polymaths. They were combining different fields of knowledge together. They didn't just do just hadith and that's it and nothing else. They mastered different areas. They were engaged in the world as full human beings, and as full human beings were interested in multiple things. And scholarship is not just limited to just knowing the Quran and hadith. I wrote a short kind of synopsis regarding Al-Khwarizmi, who wrote the text on algebra. And the reason he wrote it, he writes in his introduction to that text, was he was commissioned by the Caliph at the time, because they wanted to make sure that Islamic laws pertaining to contracts and inheritance, contracts in the market and inheritance when deaths happen, are actually fulfilled justly. And so they needed some sort of a method to do it, and this was the mathematician. So he went to the mathematician and asked him. Now the mathematician obviously had to know the inheritance laws, and he had to know the contract laws, and he had to know his fiqh, so that he can actually write a text that could be applicable, that could be applied in the way that they do things. So they had this kind of purpose. Our Muslim predecessors, before the collapse of the Caliphate, before colonization happened, our Muslim predecessors lived life with a purpose, and they knew exactly what they were about. They understood what their place in the world was, that they were here to carry out the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala by obeying what Allah has commanded and His Messenger sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam commanded, and abstaining from the things that were prohibited for us. They also understood what it meant to وَالسَّمَاءَ رَفَعَهَا وَوَضَعَ الْمِيزَانَ أَلَّا تَطْغَوْا فِي الْمِيزَانِ. They also understood the concept from Surah Al-Rahman, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has elevated the heavens and He put down the scales, and He commanded us, He prohibited us from transgressing the scales. They understood what it meant when you transgressed against the environment. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us ظهر الفساد في البر والبحر بما كسبت أيدي الناس ليذيقهم بعض ما عملوا لعلهم يرجعون. That corruption has become manifest in the land and in the sea, so that you might taste some of what you were doing. Maybe that you can return back from it. If you look at our tradition and the way that we built things, the architecture, the calligraphy, all of the things that we've done, this came out of a people that lived life with a purpose. They understood their position in the world. They understood the scholarly discourse, even if they didn't happen to be scholars. And their idea of scholarship was much more vast than the limited, what we call a sheikh today. There are a couple of places in the Quran that really give me pause. Every time I come across them, I just go like, Subhanallah. And I want you to just reflect on them for yourselves as well. The first in Surah Al-Ankabut, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, مَثَلُ الَّذِينَ اتَّخَذُوا مِن دُونِ اللَّهِ أَوْلِيَاءَ كَمَثَلِ الْعَنكَبُوتِ اتَّخَذَتْ بَيْتًا وَإِنَّ أَوْهَنَ الْبُيُوتِ لَبَيْتُ الْعَنكَبُوتِ لَوْ كَانُوا يَعْلَمُونَ. So the example or the parable of those who take protectors other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can be compared to the spider building a house. And the spider's house is the frailest of all houses. If they only understood, إِنَّ اللَّهَ يَعْلَمُ مَا يَدْعُونَ مِن دُونِهِ مِن شَيْءٍ وَهُوَ الْعَزِيزُ الْحَكِيمُ. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows what things they call upon besides Him. He is mighty, He is wise. These are the comparisons. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala then tells us, وَتِلْكَ الْأَمْثَالُ نَضْرِبُهَا لِلنَّاسِ وَمَا يَعْلَمُهَا إِلَّا الْعَالِمُونَ. وَمَا يَعْقِلُهَا إِلَّا الْعَالِمُونَ. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, these are the parables, these are the examples that He gives to people, only the wise or those of knowledge, al-alimun, people of knowledge can grasp them. Note that in this surah, which is this is the chapter of the spider. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given an example of the spider, and He's talking about the house of the spider, the web of the spider. He describes a feature about it, that it is a frail house, yet it traps. If you think more about the house of the spider, it has a pattern that is intricate. It traps the prey that it needs to trap, but yet at the same time, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes it as a frail entity, and it is the frailest of entities. What does that mean? The only people that can talk about this would be the people who would study, what would you call them, insectologists or ethologists, people who study insects and specifically study spiders and how they build their houses. And why would Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describe this as the frailest of houses? Yet when you look at it, you marvel at it. What is the point of this verse? And Allah says the only people who can actually draw lessons from this and understand what this is about, He calls them alimun. The term alim in the Quran is only used in this context, in the context of people who understand these parables about nature that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is talking about. And this is used again in Surah Fatir. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, أَلَمْ تَرَ أَنَّ اللَّهَ أَنزَلَ مِنَ السَّمَاءِ مَاءً فَأَخْرَجْنَا بِهِ ثَمَرَاتٍ مختلفا ألوانها ومن الجبال جدد بيض وحمر مختلف ألوانها وغرابيب سود ومن الناس والدواب والأنعام مختلف ألوانه كذلك إنما يخشى الله من عباده العلماء إن الله عزيز غفور. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, have you not considered how Allah sends water down from the sky, and that we produce with it fruits varied in colors, that there are in the mountains layers of white and red and of various hues and jet black, and that there are various colors among human beings, wild animals, and livestock too? It is those of His servants who have knowledge, al-ulama, who stand in true awe of Allah. Allah is Almighty, most forgiving. So Allah describes the people of knowledge, al-ulama. The word alim and ulama is only used in the Quran to refer to people who understand the natural phenomena that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is referring to and drawing examples from and giving parables with. These are the ulama in the Quran. Yet for us, we talk about ulama in our modern kind of parlance and discourse. We talk about ulama, even traditionally. Ulama is talked about in terms of people who just know the Quran and the Sunnah, and they just talk in religious discourse. In the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not refer to those people as ulama. He refers to them as ahlul dhikr. Allah says in Surah An-Nahl, for example, وَمَا أَرْسَلْنَا مِن قَبْلِكَ إِلَّا رِجَالًا نُحِي إِلَيْهِمْ فَاسْأَلُوا أَهْلَ الذِّكْرِ إِن كُنتُمْ لَا تَعْلَمُونَ بِالْبَيِّنَاتِ وَالزُّبُرِ وَأَنزَلْنَا إِلَيْكَ الذِّكْرَ لِتُبَيِّنَ لِلنَّاسِ مَا نُزِّلَ إِلَيْهِمْ وَلَعَلَّهُمْ يَتَفَكَّرُونَ. That we have not sent before you other than men to whom we have sent revelation. So ask the followers of the reminder, the people of reminder, Ahlul Dhikr, if you do not know with clear arguments and scriptures, and we have revealed to you the reminder. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala described in the Quran dhikr, and Ahlul Dhikr These are the traditionally referred to as the ulama, the scholars. Surah Al-Anbiya, وَمَا أَرْسَلْنَا قَبْلَكَ إِلَّا رِجَالًا نُوحِي إِلَيْهِمْ فَاسْأَلُوا أَهْلَ الذِّكْرِ إِن كُنتُمْ لَا تَعْلَمُونَ. We did not send before you any but men to whom we have sent revelation. So ask the people of reminder. So when it comes to religious knowledge, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala refers to it as dhikr. Why? Because Allah says to us in Surah Al-A'raf that when He asked us in the atomic realm, أَلَسْتُ بِرَبِّكُمْ, am I not your Lord? قَالُوا بَلَا شَهِدْنَا. We said, yes, we bear witness. We come into this world and then we are reminded of the original covenant that we took with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Who reminds us of that? Ahlul dhikr. The Quran is dhikr. It is to remind us of that original covenant. But who are the ulama? Ulama in the Islamic tradition is not someone who has just gone to a madrasa or gone to Dar al-Ulum or gone to Medina University and that's all they did. You have to be much more broad in your approach. And scholarship is not limited only, this is another thing that I continue to hear all the time, where the request or the demand is that you become a master of the Arabic language for you to become a scholar. If you look at scholarship much more broadly, you would recognize that yes, you have to know Arabic to become a scholar. But Arabic is a specialty that not all scholars were masters of to the degree that was equivalent between all of them. Some of them were more masterful in Arabic than others. And depending on what you chose to focus on, you could be a hadith scholar in the sense that you know what the alfaz are, you know what the terms that were used are, you know the asanid, you can judge between the degrees of the hadith themselves, but you don't necessarily have the extreme depth of Arabic language that maybe an Arabist would have. That does not preclude you from becoming a hadith scholar. It just means that when it comes to fiqh, drawing out rulings and understandings from that particular hadith may not be your thing, may not be your forte. That may be somebody else's forte. And scholars differ in their mastery of the different realms. So I ask myself now, as somebody who's just going through this and studying, and I'll give you just one example. Look at economics, for example. The idea is that you either have a capitalist or a socialist kind of system. That's usually the choice that you're presented with, the bifurcation. You know, this is the choices that is popularly discussed. But for a Muslim, I ask myself, why don't we have a Muslim who studied economics to an advanced degree? We're not just looking at, people who just did a bachelor's degree. We're looking for people who did PhDs in economics. They know the systems inside and out. They understand what capitalism is. They understand what socialism is. But not only that, they've also studied the Islamic tradition to a depth that allows them to draw out certain principles regarding economics. They studied fiqh, and specifically fiqh al-mu'amalat, transactional law, where they understand how contracts are constructed, how exchanges are done, how many exchanges are done, selling and buying and all of that. And they didn't just study it for the sake of telling us what is halal and what is haram. They studied it for the sake of what are the principles that underlie this system. Because it's not, Islamic law is not going to give you a simple answer of it's capitalist, free market capitalism, or it's socialism. It has elements that are, sure, they sound capitalist, but it also has elements that are socialist. It has checks and balances. It has aspects to it that don't neatly fit into either one of those two systems. Same thing with politics. When you look at political rule and engagement and all of that, we need to have our community look at the different fields that we're into. It could be architecture, it could be economics, it could be engineering, it could be medicine, it could be whatever it is that you are into. But you also have deeper knowledge of the Islamic tradition, whereby you know your fiqh, you know your aqidah, you know your metaphysics. You also are working on yourself. You're working on your heart. You're doing taqwa training at the same time. That's what tazkiyah and tasawwuf is about. is to understand your own motivations, to understand why you engage in certain actions, to understand how to basically worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as if you see him, and if you don't see him, you know that he sees you. And that you're always thinking, the way that you approach the world is always reasoning through an Islamic metaphysics. You're understanding why certain things take place in the world, not just simply in a material realm, but you're also understanding it from a metaphysical, theological perspective. So that when you offer solutions, first of all, when you reason through it, you give a more comprehensive analysis of what is taking place. Your approach to it is not limited to the material horizontal realm, you're also looking at it vertically. And then you offer, after you offer that deeper analysis, you offer a way forward so that you can be a guide. You're a light of guidance. How do you do that when you've been conditioned your entire life, your entire educational life, through a system that is just all about kufriyat? I get a number of people contact me, and maybe we'll talk about this in another episode, regarding their kids. Sometimes huffaz, memorizers of the Quran. They come to the end of their degree and then they're becoming atheists. And they're confused, they're bewildered. My son, my daughter memorized the Quran, studied Islamic studies, and now they're disbelieving. Well, what's happening? What's happening is that they've been imbibing Western culture, imbibing Western education, ways of knowing, ways of approaching the world. Their epistemological foundation is an epistemological foundation of kufr. Let's just call it what it is. It is disbelief. So even if they memorize the Quran, the way they approach the world and understand everything is through a materialist lens. So rather than just continue to talk about these things and observing, for me anyways, I'm observing the general kind of realm of Islamic education out there, whether it's online or on the ground. Oftentimes, the way that we gain knowledge, and I just see that with a lot of people, it's either through these limited retreats or limited intensives that we hold, where we go through a particular text, or through some online programs that are available. Alhamdulillah, there's a number of institutes that are popping up and people that are trying to offer some sort of a program. But oftentimes there's no structure to any of it. You just pick up that text, it is isolated from a number of texts, and then the idea behind it is you're now getting in touch with the tradition. But really, when you think about it, what did you do when you studied that text? You just studied one text, maybe got to know a little bit about the author of that text, but you haven't actually gained any structure. Your paradigm hasn't changed. You're still thinking in the same way that you thought about things previously, and now we've created a bit of a tension in your mind that you don't really know how to resolve. Because you just studied an isolated text devoid of a structure, devoid of synthesis with anything else. So this is where Al-Andalus Academy was born, the idea of the columns. And I talk about it in the lecture that's available for you to view as a preview. You don't have to join to watch it, but you can just see it. Link is going to be in the description. The columns, the amud. The idea is that my goal behind it and the curriculum that I've structured together is that, first of all, before we study Aqeedah, for example, in the Aqeedah module, before we study Aqeedah, we need to understand language. This thing that we're using, which is really mysterious, even people that study linguistics, it's still a puzzling thing that human beings communicate in the way that we communicate, which is qualitatively different from the way that animals communicate with each other. So first we have to understand the nature of language. Then we have to understand what grammar is. And I'm not talking about special grammar, but general grammar. Grammar as a philosophical enterprise, not grammar as just simply the cold structure of sentences and just knowing where the verb and the adverb and all of these and the noun and just naming these things. And because sometimes you can have a sentence that looks like a structurally sound, complete sentence, but if you apply the rules of general grammar from the trivium, you find out that the sentence is actually communicating nonsense. Well, how do you know that it's nonsense? What is that about? So we got to go through grammar. Then we got to go through logic and critical thinking. You need to understand how to organize your thoughts in a coherent fashion. And why is this a coherent fashion? Why not any other way of thinking? You need to also identify how to evaluate arguments. What makes an argument a good argument? How do you evaluate probabilities? And then after that, rhetoric, the way that you communicate things. Why do some people sound more convincing than others? And how do you structure your communication in a way that actually sounds convincing? And how do you identify when someone is using rhetoric to advance sophistry? So you need to understand that. And then you go into aqidah. So you need to have your mind structured in a particular way that allows you to operate as an actual intelligent human being who communicates using language in a coherent fashion. Once you have that in place, then we can talk about aqidah. Then we can talk about the specific classical traditional text that we study, which in level 1, I'm covering the aqidah sanusiya. And then you go into fiqh. How do you know that your acts of worship are actually proper? How do you know? Because your life as a Muslim operating in the world, you have to pray 5 times a day. Well, what about different circumstances that could interfere with certain actions? And how do you know your prayer is valid versus invalid? And how do you fix it? And how do you know that when do you do tayammum and traveling, the distances that you're traveling? And when do you know that you can shorten your prayer versus not? And when do you know that you're actually allowed to even shorten your prayer even when you're traveling? Because sometimes you can't. I mean, all these rules, fasting rules, I mean, just different fiqh, just the practical, what Wa'il Hallaq in his text talks about regarding the technologies of the self. This is something that we covered in Al-Andalus book club. That, subhanAllah, for a non-Muslim to notice this was just something amazing. The technology of the self. That as a Muslim, our belief and our cultivation of our khilafah is not restricted, or is not only about our intellectual beliefs, but it's also our practices. The fact that the prayer itself, 2 rak'ats for subh, 4 for dhuhr, 4 for asr, 3 for maghrib, 4 for isha, that actually has an impact in the numbers that Allah subhanahu, because Allah is al-Hakim, Allah is the wise. These things are not arbitrary. There is a reason why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala stipulated that subh prayer is 2 rak'ats. And there is a reason why dhuhr is 4, and asr is 4, and maghrib is 3, and isha is 4. And that reason has a direct material manifestation in this world, a spiritual manifestation upon us that benefits us in the next world later on. So we actually benefit in this world and in the next world. And it's cultivating something within us when we do it with presence. And when you do it, you have to know how to do it. And the reason you need to know how to do it is because the beloved sallallahu alayhi wasallam was taught how to do it by Jibreel, was commissioned, and prayer was commanded directly. It was not revealed. It was a command direct from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in Laylatul Mi'raj, in the ascension, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala took the beloved sallallahu alayhi wa sallam on Isra and Mi'raj, and he was commanded directly with the prayer. So this is an important thing that you need to understand how to do and perform properly. So that has to be done. There has to be a structure to all of this. Spiritual purification. A lot of us have each one of us has ailments, and our ailments are different, but we need to know what these ailments are, and how do you target these ailments, and how do you identify them first of all, and how do you remove them, and what pace do you remove them at, and how do you identify whether you've removed them or not, and how subtle can they get. There's a whole discipline in the Islamic tradition that deals with this, and if you don't have structure, you're not going to get anywhere. And then finally, contemporary topics in Al-Andalus Academy is this final kind of the crescendo of it all. We've done all of these things. Now let's talk about something that is contemporary. How do I reason through this? And you'll find that once you have a structure of how to think and how to practice and how to purify yourself, your internal heart, then when it comes to contemporary topics, the way that you reason through all of these things is going to be totally different. So Al-Andalus Academy is basically my attempt to offer a solution. For a lot of us, we don't have a habit of learning. We think about Islamic studies as this thing that we have to just abandon everything that we're doing and just go and do that full time. And my solution to that is no, you don't. You can do this as an ongoing basis, the same way that you exercise, the same way that you do these habitual practices that you engage in. Knowledge needs to become a habit, that you need to dedicate some time on a daily basis or on a weekly basis where you sit down and learn something. And Islamic studies, this is something that is not a degree program that you just finish and you're done. This is an ongoing thing. So I've got a number of lectures and a number of things that are available there through the columns or through Al-Andalus Book Club. where you go through all of this material and you just continue. The idea behind it is that to create a community online where it's an educational community. This is a gathering of people where we can discuss these subjects in a setting that is beyond this back and forth on social media that you see with the mudslinging. No, we're not interested in that. We're not interested in frivolous arguments. We're interested in knowledge, and we're interested in studying, and we're interested in cultivating our human being. So Al-Andalus Academy is the place that I've basically tried to put together through forums and student discussions and lectures and webinars, and the ability to set up appointments with myself to discuss certain topics and questions that might be not addressed directly through any of the lectures and you would like to have a direct conversation about it one-on-one. All of that is through Al-Andalus Academy, which you can just get all the information on when you go and visit the website. And that's really my small way of trying to hopefully resolve some tensions that people have with regards to their approach to Islam, because it really comes down to structure. For me, the way that it works is structure. I used to be a personal trainer back in the day, and we see people come to the gym, and to this day I see them coming to the gym, and when they're training, it's really fascinating to see people that will train for years on end, and you look at them when they first started, let's say 5 years ago, and look at them today, not any different. Sometimes they're actually worse. They might have gained a little bit of bad weight. Meanwhile, you see someone who comes in and says, I actually want a structure. I don't know how to train my body. I don't know what kind of program to do. Can you give me a training regimen? And then you actually train them and you see changes that are happening. I've had clients come to me when I was training them. They've been working on it for years. Just sit with me for, just hang with me in the gym for a good couple of months. Totally different. Because it's not just about what you do in the gym, it's also about your diet and structuring that. It's about structuring your rest periods. It's about cycling your programs through. It's about finding out what your goals are and training for that particular goal, setting up a program that is specific to you and to your needs. It's a number of things. Right now I'm training to do a marathon because it's like the new thing that I've just got in my head. I want to do a marathon. So there's a program to train for a marathon so that you can train your muscles, your body, your heart, your circulation, all of that so that you can actually get to that level. It also involves dietary changes so that you can have the energy for it. And it's a structured program that you follow so that you can increase your stamina and endurance to be able to eventually do a marathon at a respectable pace. So this goes on with all of life. We need to do the same thing with our Islamic studies. And my goal behind this is, I don't tell you that I will make you into a scholar, and I don't tell you that I will not make you into a scholar. This is on you. My goal behind Al-Andalus Academy is to provide you with the tools and keys so that you can become comfortable navigating through the tradition with a structure. But first, we need to get some foundations set up. And the level 1, the first year with Al-Andalus Academy is just getting foundations. Let's just get sorted out. Let's just get reoriented because we are a disoriented community. We go to lectures, we go to conferences, we get this high, we hear some speeches. We are living vicariously through a lot of the speakers. And by that I mean we hear speakers that say things that sound profound, but many of us don't actually grasp the significance of some of the statements that they're making. And we don't have structure to think about any of this stuff. And we leave, and then 2 days later, we are back to where we were before, and whatever doubts we had before, they return. Sometimes they return stronger, and we're exposed to a lot of nonsense and a lot of kufr. Through our education systems, through social media, through the popular discourses that we find on online discussions. The whole point is to get a structure going. So my point behind the Andalus Academy is to try to revamp all of that. And that's just my small contribution, as I said, with regards to Islamic education. There's more to say, of course, but this is my first episode coming back. So I'm a little bit rusty in trying to come up with more of a structured way of putting this together. But I thought, put something out there, announce it to those of you who are not on online social media or don't know about this. Al-Andalus Academy is live. If you want to join, just go through the links in the description. I welcome all of your feedback. I appreciate all of the reviews that you've been giving me on iTunes, 5-star ratings, and the comments that I get. Will inshallah be a little bit more regular with the podcast now that I have a bit more of a structure to my calendar. And I hope that all of this has been beneficial to you. Any feedback, you can send it through info@alandalusacademy.com. Otherwise, I will catch up with you guys in the next episode, inshallah. Subhanak Allahumma bihamdika ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk.
ذنوب عمر الماضى في الشعر والخدم إذ قلدني ما تخشى عواقبه كأنني بهما هدي من النعم أطعت غاية الصبا